for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. Looks like Donald Trump's going to be forking out more money as he has been ordered to pay over $350 million in his civil fraud case in New York. So we will talk about that gleefully. We'll also talk about Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny pretty much being killed while in prison. Now, we know that Putin is responsible for this, so there's no arguing that point. But here's the thing. Donald Trump, instead of mentioning this, complains about how he's getting screwed over in his court cases, and it's just, and comparing it to Navalny. I just can't believe it. The first person has been charged under Michigan's new must lock up your gun laws. So we will talk about that, and we've got plenty of more topics to discuss. Before we get started today, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. Once again, if you're currently getting us through Google Podcast, a reminder that Google is ending its podcast platform in April. You'll want to switch to either Apple Podcast or Spreaker. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern, and you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. Right now, let's get into our first story here. This is Michael R. Sizak, Jafe Offenhartz, and Jennifer Peltz writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 16th out of New York. We should mention we are recording this show on Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. Again, the story comes out of New York City. A New York judge ordered Donald Trump on Friday to pay $355 million in penalties, finding that Trump lied about his wealth for years in a sweeping civil fraud verdict that pierces his billionaire image but stops short of putting his real estate empire out of business. Judge Arthur Engeron's decision after a trial in New York Attorney General Letitia James's lawsuit punishes Trump, his company, and executives, including his two eldest sons, for scheming to dupe banks, insurers, and others by inflating his wealth on financial statements. It forces a shakeup at the top of his Trump organization, putting the company under court supervision and curtailing how it does business. The decision is a staggering setback for the Republican presidential frontrunner, the latest and costliest consequence of his recent legal troubles. The magnitude of the verdict, on top of penalties and other cases, could dramatically dent Trump's financial resources and damage his identity as a savvy businessman who parlayed his fame as a real estate developer into reality TV stardom and the presidency. He has vowed to appeal and won't have to pay immediately. Trump's true punishment could be far costlier because under state law he is also required to pay interest on the penalties, which James says put him on the hook for a total of more than $450 million. The amount which would be paid to the state will grow until he pays. Good luck there. He doesn't pay his contractors. Why would he pay the state? Donald Trump is currently facing 4 criminal indictments and a civil lawsuit. The judge made clear, however, that the Trump Organization will continue to operate, backing away from an earlier ruling that would have dissolved Trump's companies. Engeron, a Democrat, concluded that Trump and his company were, quote, likely to continue their fraudulent ways, end of quote, without the penalties and controls he imposed. Engeron concluded that Trump and his co-defendants, quote, failed to accept responsibility, end of quote, and that experts who testified on his behalf, quote, simply denied reality, end of quote. In a searing 92-page opinion, Engeron wrote this, quote, this is a venial sin, not a mortal sin. They did not rob a bank at gunpoint. Donald Trump is not Bernard Madoff. Yet defendants are incapable of admitting the error of their ways, end of quote. He said their, quote, complete lack of contrition and remorse borders on pathological, and the frauds found here leap off the page and shock the conscience, end of quote. Trump said the decision was election interference and, quote, weaponization against a political opponent, end of quote, complaining to reporters that his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida that he was being penalized for, quote, having built a perfect company, great cash, great buildings, great everything, end of quote. Really? Yeah, great cash and great company on other people's work that you'd never paid them to do, like your contractors. You've screwed your contractors multiple times there, buddy. Letitia James, a Democrat, told reporters that justice has been served. She called the ruling, quote, a tremendous victory for the state, this nation, and for everyone who believes that we all must play by the same rules, even former presidents. Now Donald Trump is finally facing accountability for his lying, cheating, and staggering fraud, because no matter how big, rich, or powerful you think you are, no one is above the law, end of quote. Trump still owns the Trump Organization, but he put his assets into a revocable trust and relinquished a leadership role when he became president in 2017, putting his sons Eric and Donald Trump Jr. in charge of day-to-day operations. Engeron's ruling imposes a 3-year ban on Trump serving as an officer or director of any New York company and bars his son for 2 years, effectively requiring the company to find new leadership, at least temporarily. The monetary penalties involve what Engeron said were ill-gotten gains that Trump attained by making himself seem richer. They include money Trump saved by securing lower loan interest rates and profits from the sale of properties that he might not have been able to develop without that financing. Eric and Donald Trump Jr. were each ordered to pay $4 million, their share of profits from the 2022 sale of Trump's Washington, D.C. hotel, and the company's former longtime chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, was ordered to pay $1 million, which is half of the $2 million severance he's receiving. All told, Trump and his co-defendants owe $364 million, which James's office says grows to $464 million when interest is included. Weisselberg and another longtime company executive, Jeffrey McConney, were barred from ever holding a corporate finance or leadership role in the state. Wow. So that puts the kibosh on their careers. Engeron put the Trump Organization under the supervision of an independent monitor for at least 3 years, extending oversight he ordered after James sued Trump in 2022 and said the company must hire an independent compliance director to ensure that it follows financial reporting obligations and rules. Engeron wrote that stripping Trump of his companies as he'd previously ordered was no longer necessary because the company will be under a 2-tiered oversight, with the independent monitor, retired federal judge Barbara Jones, and the compliance director keeping an eye on any activities that could lead to fraud. Because it was civil, not criminal, the case did not carry the potential of prison time, unfortunately. Engeron issued his decision after a 2.5-month trial that Trump turned into a frequent, albeit unorthodox, campaign stage. He trekked to court nearly a dozen times, watching testimony, grousing to news cameras outside the courtroom, and bristling under oath that he was the victim of a rigged legal system. During the trial, Trump called Engeron extremely hostile and James a political hack. He also incurred $15,000 in fines for violating a gag order that the judge imposed after he made a disparaging and untrue social media post about a key court staffer. In a 6-minute diatribe during closing arguments in January, Trump proclaimed, quote, "I am an innocent man," end of quote, and called the case a, quote, "fraud on me," end of quote. Yeah, he certainly did. Well, it's not a fraud. He is not innocent. Found guilty. Guilty. Trump has boasted for years about his wealth, but James's lawsuit alleged that his claims weren't just harmless bragging, but years of deceptive practices as he built the multinational collection of skyscrapers, golf courses, and other properties that catapulted him to wealth, fame, and the White House. The suit accused Trump and his co-defendants of routinely puffing up his financial statements to create an illusion his properties were more valuable than they really were. State lawyers said Trump exaggerated his wealth by as much as $3.6 billion in 1 year. James brought the case under a New York law that authorizes her to investigate persistent fraud in business dealings. Trump incorporated the Trump Organization in New York in 1981. Even before the trial began, Engoron ruled that James had proven Trump's financial statements were fraudulent. The judge ordered some of Trump's companies removed from his control and dissolved. An appeals court put that decision on hold. In that earlier ruling, the judge found that, among other tricks, Trump's financial statements had wrongly claimed his Trump Tower penthouse was nearly 3 times its actual size and overvalued his Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida, based on the idea that the property could be developed for residential use, even though he had surrendered rights to develop it for any uses but a club. Trump, one of 40 witnesses to testify at the trial, said his financial statements actually understated his net worth. Trump maintains that he is worth several $billion and testified last year that he had about $400 million in cash in addition to properties and other investments. Reiterating his testimony, Trump said Friday, quote, "There were no victims because the banks made a lot of money," end of quote. Yeah, I'm sure. The victims were the people of the state of New York there, Trumpy. Trumpty Dumpty. I guess his empire's crumbling around him. This is beautiful. I love it. Trump and his lawyers have said outside accountants who helped prepare the statements should have flagged any discrepancies and have said the documents came with disclaimers that shielded him from liability. They also argued that some of the allegations were barred by a statute of limitations. Engoron decided the case because neither side sought a jury, and state law doesn't allow for juries for this type of lawsuit. The suit is one of many legal headaches for Trump as he campaigns for a return to the White House. He has been indicted 4 times in the last year, accused in Georgia and Washington, D.C. of plotting to overturn his 2020 election loss to Democrat Joe Biden, in Florida of hoarding classified documents, and in Manhattan of falsifying business records related to hush money paid to porn actress Stormy Daniels on his behalf. On Thursday, a judge confirmed Trump's hush money trial will start March 25th. A judge in Atlanta heard arguments Thursday and Friday on whether to remove Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from his Georgia election interference case because she had a personal relationship with a special prosecutor she hired. Those criminal accusations haven't appeared to undermine his march toward a rematch with President Joe Biden, but civil litigation has threatened him financially. Last month, the jury ordered Trump to pay $83.3 million to writer E. Jean Carroll for defaming her after she accused him in 2019 of sexually assaulting her in a Manhattan department store in the 1990s. That's on top of the $5 million a jury awarded Carroll in a related trial last year. In 2022, the Trump Organization was convicted of tax fraud and fined $1.6 million in an unrelated criminal case for helping executives dodge taxes on extravagant perks such as Manhattan apartments and luxury cars. James, who campaigned for office as a Trump critic and watchdog, started scrutinizing his business practices in March 2019 after his former personal lawyer Michael Cohen testified to Congress that Trump exaggerated his wealth on financial statements provided to Deutsche Bank while trying to obtain financing to buy the NFL's Buffalo Bills. James's office previously sued Trump for misusing his own charitable foundation to further his political and business interests. Trump was ordered to pay $2 million to an array of charities as a fine, and the charity, the Trump Foundation, was shut down. I still think the Trump Organization should be shut down permanently. Get him out of business. He doesn't belong. He's a crook. He is a true crook. You know, Nixon said, I'm not a crook. Well, Trump is, buddy. Speaking of Trump, he went on television to whine and complain about his New York trial, but he compared it to basically the assassination of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. We'll talk about this right now. This is Jill Colvin writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 19th out of New York. More than 72 hours after Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny's death in an Arctic penal colony, Donald Trump mentioned him by name for the first time in a post on his social media site that focused not on Navalny, but his own legal woes. Listen to this, folks. President Joe Biden and other Western leaders have blamed Russian President Vladimir Putin for the 47-year-old's death, responding with anger and demands for answers. But Trump made no mention of Putin or Navalny's family in the post Monday morning, that instead cast himself as a victim and continued to paint the U.S. as a nation in decline. Here's what he wrote on his social media. Quote, "The sudden death of Alexei Navalny has made me more and more aware of what is happening in our country. It is a slow, steady progression with crooked, radical left politicians, prosecutors, and judges leading us down a path to destruction. Open borders, rigged elections, and grossly unfair courtroom decisions are destroying America. Destroying America, all in capital letters." He finishes in all capital letters. "We are a nation in decline, a failing nation, exclamation point, MAGA 2024, end of quote. Yeah. No, we're a nation that was in decline while you were president, but we're not anymore because Joe Biden has turned things around. Sorry, truth hurts, buddy. Truth social, truth hurts. The truth ain't social, it hurts. It hurts you. A New York judge on Friday ordered Trump to pay $355 million in penalties in a civil fraud trial, finding Trump had inflated his wealth for years, scheming to dupe banks, insurers, and others. Trump has also been criminally charged in 4 separate investigations, first of which is scheduled to go to trial next month. They refer to Trump as former president here. We do not do that on this show. Trump's post drew immediate denunciation from his rivals, including Nikki Haley, his last remaining challenger in the Republican nominating contest, who has been stepping up her criticism of Trump heading into Saturday's South Carolina primary. She wrote, quote, "Donald Trump could have condemned Vladimir Putin for being a murderous thug. Trump could have praised Navalny's courage. Instead, he stole a page from liberals' playbook denouncing America and comparing our country to Russia," end of quote. He's comparing our country to Russia because Trump wants to make this country an exact duplicate of Russia. I'm going to be a dictator on day one. Trump said that. That because it's the truth. That's what he wants to do. He wants to turn the United States into the United States of Russia. You better get your head out of your ass, everybody. You better think. You better do it now, because it'll be too late come November. Too late. On Monday morning in Sumter, South Carolina, she further accused Trump of, quote, siding with a thug, end of quote, in Putin, whom she called, quote, a dictator who killed his political opponents, end of quote. And if you don't think Trump will do that if he gets back in office again, you better think. You better use that lump of flesh that's above your neck called your head. You better do it. You better listen to the words that I'm saying, because you know I'm telling the truth. Biden's campaign posted on X, formerly Twitter, that after days of silence, Trump finally responded by comparing Navalny to himself in a, quote, deranged social media post, end of quote. Trump has been criticized for nearly a decade now for his refusal to denounce the Russian leader and his frequent complimentary statements. As president, Trump drew outrage when he openly questioned his own intelligence agency's finding that Russia meddled in the 2016 U.S. election to help him win, seeming to accept Putin's insistence that Moscow's hands were clean. Yeah, you know what I think about that. Russia was all up into the election. You can quote me on it. This month, he again caused an uproar when he said he once warned a NATO ally that he would encourage Russia, quote, to do whatever the hell they want, end of quote, to countries in the alliance that don't spend enough on defense. Navalny's widow, Yulia Navalnaya, has accused Putin of killing her husband in a remote prison and refusing to turn over his body as part of a cover-up. Russian authorities have said Navalny's cause of death Friday is still unknown. Really? He was probably poisoned, if you want my honest opinion. It is the subject of a new investigation. Sure it is. Bullshit! Its findings are likely to be met with deep skepticism. Well, you got that right. Trump's reference to Navalny's sudden death was notable. Prison officials allegedly told Navalny's mother when she arrived at the penal colony Saturday that her son had perished from, quote, sudden death syndrome, end of quote. That's according to Ivan Zdanov, director of Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation. He wrote that on X, the former Twitter. Navalny had been in prison since January 2021 when he returned to Moscow after recuperating from a nerve agent poisoning that he blamed on the Kremlin, and more directly on Putin. Because Putin is a murderous dictator, and so is Trump. Because Trump loves Putin, gushes over him, gushes over Kim Jong-un, gushes over dictators all around the world. Because Trump wants to be one. That's what he admires. He admires what he wants to be. A strongman, a tin pot dictator. And if you elect him in November, that's what he's going to be come January 20th. He will be a tin pot dictator. You can mark my words. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Let me go ahead and continue with our next story here. This is Brian Melly writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 19th out of London. Wikileaks founder Julian Assange's fight to avoid facing spying charges in the United States may be nearing an end following a protracted legal saga in the UK that included 7 years of self-exile inside a foreign embassy and 5 years in prison. Assange faces what could be his final court hearing in London starting Tuesday as he tries to stop his extradition to the U.S. The High Court has scheduled 2 days of arguments over whether Assange can ask an appeals court to block his transfer. If the court doesn't allow the appeal to go forward, he could be sent across the Atlantic. His wife says the decision is a matter of life and death for Assange, whose health has deteriorated during his time in custody. Stella Assange said Thursday, quote, his life is at risk every single day he stays in prison. If he's extradited, he will die, end of quote. The 52-year-old Assange, who is an Australian computer expert, has been indicted in the U.S. on 18 charges over Wikileaks' publication of hundreds of thousands of classified documents in 2010. Prosecutors say he conspired with U.S. Army intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning to hack into a Pentagon computer and release secret diplomatic cables and military files on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He faces 17 counts of espionage and 1 charge of computer misuse. If convicted, his lawyers said he could receive a prison term of up to 175 years, though American authorities have said any sentence is likely to be much lower. Assange and his supporters argue he acted as a journalist to expose U.S. military wrongdoing and is protected under press freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Absolutely correct right there. Julian Assange should be awarded a medal. He should get the Pulitzer, not prison. Let me repeat that. Julian Assange is a hero. Among the files published by Wikileaks was video of a 2007 Apache helicopter attack by American forces in Baghdad that killed 11 people, including 2 Reuters journalists. Stella Assange said, quote, Julian has been indicted for receiving, possessing, and communicating information to the public of evidence of war crimes committed by the U.S. government. Reporting a crime is never a crime. End of quote. Well, except here in the U.S. and probably Russia, too. U.S. lawyers say Assange is guilty of trying to hack the Pentagon computer and that WikiLeaks publications created a grave and imminent risk to U.S. intelligence sources in Afghanistan and Iraq. No, they didn't. Sorry. While the U.S. criminal case against Assange was only unsealed in 2019, his freedom has been restricted for more than a dozen years. Assange took refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012 and was granted political asylum after courts in England ruled he should be extradited to Sweden as part of a rape investigation in the Scandinavian country. And by the way, that allegation is bullshit, too. He was arrested by British police after Ecuador's government withdrew his asylum status in 2019 and then jailed for skipping bail when he first took shelter inside the embassy. Although Sweden dropped its sex crimes investigation, Assange has remained in London's high-security Belmarsh prison while the extradition battle with the U.S. continues. A judge in London initially blocked Assange's transfer to the U.S. on the grounds he was likely to kill himself if held in harsh American prison conditions. But subsequent courts cleared the way for the move after U.S. authorities provided assurances he wouldn't experience the severe treatment that his lawyers said would put his physical and mental health at risk. Stella Assange and her husband's supporters have criticized those assurances as being meaningless because they are conditional. If the London court rejects Assange's plea for a full appeal, he could be extradited to the U.S. once British officials approve his removal. His legal team plans to appeal an adverse ruling to the European Court of Human Rights, but they fear he could possibly be transferred before the court in Strasbourg, France, could halt his removal. If he prevails at this week's hearing, it would set the stage for an appeal process that is likely to further drag out the case. WikiLeaks editor-in-chief Kristen Hrafnsson said, quote, this procedure has been marked by prolonged and creeping time frames. We call it punishment through process. It is obviously a deliberate attempt to wear him down to punish him by taking this long. End of quote. While the UK Supreme Court rejected Assange's petition saying he didn't raise an arguable point of law, his wife said his new bid will raise several points that are grounds for appeal. Lawyers for Assange plan to argue that he can't get a fair trial in the U.S., that a U.S.-UK treaty prohibits extradition for political offenses, and that the crime of espionage was not meant to apply to publishers. Stella Assange wrote on X, formerly known as Twitter, quote, the drafters of the Espionage Act did not intend for publishers to fall within its ambit. Unchallenged expert evidence showed that receipt and publication of state secrets is routine and that there was an unbroken practice of non-prosecution of publishers. The prosecution crosses a new legal frontier and breaks all legal precedents. End of quote. Stella Assange said her husband's mental and physical health has declined dramatically and he's aged prematurely in prison. He experienced a mini-stroke in October 2021 and was so ill in December that he broke a rib coughing. She said, quote, I worry about him every time he gets sick. The mental toll is extreme. End of quote. The couple, who got married at Belmarsh Prison almost 2 years ago, have 2 young sons, Gabriel and Max, who were conceived during Assange's stay in the embassy. The boys visit their father in prison every week, undergoing security checks that include being patted down by guards and sniffed by dogs. The couple is protective of the children who haven't been told why their father is behind bars, according to their mother. As she choked up, she said, quote, I don't think it's fair on them to know what's really going on. They know exactly what a prison is. They know that the guards are stopping Julian from leaving the prison even though he wants to come home. End of quote. Let me repeat once again, Julian Assange is a hero who deserves the Pulitzer for his publication in WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, by the way, has never had to retract a story ever, and it wins awards. Lots of international awards for its journalism. Sorry, that's the truth, folks. Right now, let's go ahead to a bizarro story out of Alabama. This is Kim Chandler writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 21st out of Montgomery, Alabama. Listen to this, folks. If you think that abortion was already turned upside down, you need to listen to this story. The Alabama Supreme Court has ruled that frozen embryos can be considered children under state law, a decision critics said could have sweeping implications for fertility treatment in the state. The decision was issued in a pair of wrongful death cases brought by 3 couples who had frozen embryos destroyed in an accident at a fertility clinic. Justices, citing anti-abortion language in the Alabama Constitution, ruled that an 1872 state law allowing parents to sue over the death of a minor child, quote, applies to all unborn children regardless of their location, end of quote. Justice J. Mitchell wrote in Friday's majority ruling by the all-Republican court, quote, unborn children are children without exception based on developmental stage, physical location, or any other ancillary characteristics, end of quote. Mitchell said the court had previously ruled that fetuses killed while a woman is pregnant are covered under Alabama's Wrongful Death of a Minor Act, and nothing excludes extrauterine children from the act's coverage. The ruling brought a rush of warnings about the potential impact on fertility treatments and the freezing of embryos, which had previously been considered property by the courts. Barbara Callara, CEO of Resolve, the National Infertility Association, told the Associated Press Tuesday, quote, this ruling is stating that a fertilized egg, which is a clump of cells, is now a person. It really puts into question the practice of IVF, end of quote. The group called the decision, quote, a terrifying development for the 1 in 6 people impacted by infertility, end of quote, who need in vitro fertilization. She said it raises questions for providers and patients, including if they can freeze future embryos created during fertility treatment or if patients could ever donate or destroy unused embryos. Sean Tipton, a spokesperson with the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, said at least one Alabama fertility clinic has been instructed by their affiliated hospital to pause IVF treatment in the immediate wake of the decision. Dr. Paul Amato, president of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, said a decision to treat frozen fertilized eggs as the legal equivalent of a child or gestating fetus could limit the availability of modern health care. Amato said, quote, by insisting that these very different biological entities are legally equivalent, the best state-of-the-art fertility care will be made unavailable to the people of Alabama. No healthcare provider will be willing to provide treatments if those treatments may lead to civil or criminal charges, end of quote. 26-year-old Gabby Goydell, who is pursuing IVF treatment in Alabama after 3 miscarriages, said the court ruling came down on the same day she began daily injections ahead of egg retrieval. Goydell said, quote, it just kind of took me by storm. It was like all I could think about, and it was just a very stressful thing to hear. I immediately messaged my clinic and asked if this could potentially halt us. They said we have to take it one day at a time, end of quote. She said her clinic is continuing to provide treatment for now, but said it will let her know if they have to change course. Goydell said she turned to IVF and pre-implantation genetic testing after the multiple miscarriages related to genetic issues. She said, quote, without IVF, I would have to probably go through several more miscarriages before I even had an option of having a baby that is my own, end of quote. The plaintiffs in the Alabama case had undergone IVF treatments that led to the creation of several embryos, some of which were implanted and resulted in healthy births. The couples paid to keep others frozen in a storage facility at the Mobile Infirmary Medical Center. A patient in 2020 wandered into the area and removed several embryos, dropping them on the floor and killing them, the ruling said. The justices ruled that wrongful death lawsuits by the couples could proceed. The clinic and hospital that are defendants in the case could ask the court to reconsider its decision. Michael Upchurch, a lawyer for the fertility clinic in the lawsuit, Center for Reproductive Medicine, said that they are, quote, evaluating the consequences of the decision and have no further comment at this time, end of quote. An anti-abortion group cheered the decision. Lila Rose, president and founder of Live Action, said in a statement, quote, each person from the tiniest embryo to an elder nearing the end of life has incalculable value that deserves and is guaranteed legal protection, end of quote. Chief Justice Tom Parker issued a concurring opinion in which he quoted the Bible in discussing the meaning of the phrase, the sanctity of unborn life in the Alabama Constitution. Parker said, quote, even before birth, all human beings bear the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing his glory, end of quote. Hey, Tom Parker, the majority of this country doesn't believe in God. We are not a Christian nation, period, end of story. Unbelievable. This is the stuff that pisses me off, folks. It pisses me off to no end. Religion should not have anything to do with law, period. Full stop. Justice Greg Cook, who filed the only full dissent to the majority opinion, said the 1872 law did not define minor child and was being stretched from the original intent to cover frozen embryos. He wrote, quote, no court anywhere in the country has reached the conclusion the main opinion reaches, end of quote. He added that the ruling, quote, almost certainly ends the creation of frozen embryos through in vitro fertilization in Alabama, end of quote. The Alabama Supreme Court decision partly hinged on anti-abortion language added to the Alabama Constitution in 2018, stating it is the, quote, policy of this state to ensure the protection of the rights of the unborn child, end of quote. Really? Yeah. These people are not pro-life, as George Carlin says. They are pro-fetus. Once you're a fetus, they care about you. They care about the unborn. But once you're born, you're on your own. You better believe Carlin, folks. Supporters at the time said it would have no impact unless states gain more control over abortion access. States gained control of abortion access in 2022. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said the Alabama decision reflected the consequences of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and blamed Republican elected officials for blocking access to reproductive and emergency care to women. She told reporters aboard Air Force One, quote, this president and this vice president will continue to fight to protect access to reproductive health care and call on Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade in federal law for all women in every state, end of quote. Well, now since Alabama is going to get rid of IVF, there are people that want to have babies. I don't understand it. I think the population of this country, for that matter, the earth in general, we're overpopulated. We need less people here because less people leads to less consumption of natural resources, which creates less pollution in the form of smoke, burning of carbon, production of plastics, plastic waste. It'll help the ozone. It'll help the climate. We need to stop having babies. It's that simple, folks. It really is. My opinion. All right, let's get to our next story here before I go off on an anti-baby tirade. This is some really interesting science coming out with the brain. This is Laura Unger writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 21st out of New York City. Emily Hollenbeck lived with a deep recurring depression she likened to a black hole where gravity felt so strong and her limbs so heavy she could barely move. She knew the illness could kill her. Both of her parents had taken their lives. Gosh, she sounds a lot like where I have been in most of my life. As somebody who has gone through crippling depression, PTSD, diagnosed with 4 mental illnesses, I can sympathize with somebody like Emily Hollenbeck. And I'm glad that she's able to get this treatment. Let me tell you about it right now. She was willing to try something extreme, having electrodes implanted in her brain as part of an experimental therapy. Researchers say the treatment, called deep brain stimulation, or DBS, could eventually help many of the 3 million Americans like her with depression that resist other treatments. The treatment is already approved for conditions such as Parkinson's disease and epilepsy, and many doctors and patients hope it will become more widely available for depression soon. The treatment gives patients targeted electric impulses, much like a pacemaker for the brain. A growing body of recent research is promising, with more underway, although 2 large studies that showed no advantage to using DBS for depression temporarily halted progress, and some scientists continue to raise concerns. Meanwhile, the Food and Drug Administration has agreed to speed up its review of Abbott's laboratory's request to use its DBS devices for treatment-resistant depression. Hollenbeck, who is part of ongoing research at Mount Sinai West, said, quote, "At first I was blown away because the concept of it seems so intense. Like it's brain surgery. You have wires embedded in your brain. But I also felt like at that point I've tried everything and I was desperate for an answer." End of quote. Hollenbeck suffered from depression symptoms as a child growing up in poverty and occasional homelessness. But her first major bout happened in college after her father's suicide in 2009. Another hit during a Teach for America stint, leaving her almost immobilized and worried she'd lose her classroom job and sink into poverty again. She landed in a hospital. She said, quote, "I ended up having sort of an on and off pattern," end of quote, which is what I've experienced with my depression. After responding to medication for a while, she'd relapse. And that's the problem with medication, is it'll work for a while, then it'll quit working. And then you have to go through the process of trying to figure out what medications work and what medications give you such bad side effects that the cure is worse than the disease. Risperdal being one of them for me. When I was on Risperdal many years ago, I blew up like a balloon. I'm a heavy person, but I really got heavier rapidly under Risperdal. And a lot of people do. She managed to earn a doctorate in psychology, even after losing her mom in her last year of grad school. But the black hole always returned to pull her in. At times, she said she thought about ending her life. She said she exhausted all options, including electroconvulsive therapy, when a doctor told her about DBS 3 years ago. She said, quote, "Nothing else was working," end of quote. She became one of only a few hundred treated with DBS for depression. Hollenbeck had the brain surgery while sedated but awake. Dr. Brian Capel, who directs Mount Sinai Center for Neuromodulation, placed thin metal electrodes in a region of her brain called the subcallosal cingulate cortex, which regulates emotional behavior and is involved in feelings of sadness. The electrodes are connected by an internal wire to a device placed under the skin in her chest, which controls the amount of electrical stimulation and delivers constant low-voltage pulses. Hollenbeck calls it continuous Prozac. Doctors say the stimulation helps because electricity speaks the brain's language. Neurons communicate using electrical and chemical signals. Capel said in normal brains, electrical activity reverberates unimpeded in all areas, in a sort of dance. In depression, the dancers get stuck within the brain's emotional circuitry. DBS seems to unstick the circuit, he said, allowing the brain to do what it would normally do. Hollenbeck said the effect was almost immediate. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Martin Figi, said, quote, "The first day after surgery, she started feeling a lifting of that negative mood, of the heaviness. I remember her telling me that she was able to enjoy Vietnamese takeout for the first time in years and really taste the food. She started to decorate her home, which had been completely empty since she moved to New York," end of quote. For Hollenbeck, the most profound change was finding pleasure in music again. She said, quote, "When I was depressed, I couldn't listen to music. It sounded and felt like I was listening to radio static. Then on a sunny day in the summer, I was walking down the street listening to the song. I just felt this buoyancy, this, I want to walk more, I want to go and do things. And I realized I'm getting better," end of quote. She only wishes the therapy had been there for her parents. And I can tell you that as somebody who was depressed for a very long time, I didn't want to hear music. I was a disc jockey. I was a strip club disc jockey. I played music the 7 hours that I was working my shift, or however long my shift was. When I left work, I didn't want to hear music. It didn't do anything for me. Now I'm at the point I enjoy listening to music again. I enjoy listening to a lot of music, a lot of different various music. And it's wonderful. It really is. The road to this treatment stretches back 2 decades when neurologist Dr. Helen Mayberg led promising early research. But setbacks followed. Large studies launched more than a dozen years ago showed no significant difference in response rates for treated and untreated groups. Dr. Catherine Skangos, a psychiatrist at the University of California, San Francisco, also researching DBS and depression, cited a couple of reasons. The treatment wasn't personalized, and researchers looked at outcomes over a matter of weeks. Some later research showed depression patients had stable, long-term relief from DBS when observed over years. Overall, across different brain targets, DBS for depression is associated with average response rates of 60%, according to one 2022 study. Treatments being tested by various teams are much more tailored to individuals today. Mount Sinai's team is one of the most prominent researching DBS for depression in the U.S. There, a neuroimaging expert uses brain images to locate the exact spot for Capel to place electrodes. And this sounds a lot like the study that I was a part of at Cornell, where they did electrodes. The problem was they couldn't get a correct path of my map because I had back surgery in 1988 and I have stainless steel metal rods in my back. They couldn't do a 3 Tesla MRI on me. They could only do 1.5, and they need to do 3 to get the deeper images of the brain. And they couldn't do that. So they couldn't map me out correctly, which is probably why the study didn't work for me, or at least didn't work for me long term. Mayberg, a pioneer in DBS research and founding director of the Nash Family Center for Advanced Circuit Therapeutics at Mount Sinai, said, quote, "We have a template, a blueprint of exactly where we're going to go. Everybody's brain is a little different, just like people's eyes are a little further apart or a nose is a little bigger or smaller," end of quote. Other research teams also tailor treatment to patients, although their methods are slightly different. Skangos and her colleagues are studying various targets in the brain and delivering stimulation only when needed for severe symptoms. She said the best therapy may end up being a combination of approaches. As teams keep working, Abbott is launching a big clinical trial this year ahead of a potential FDA decision. Skangos said, quote, "The field is advancing quite quickly. I'm hoping we will have approval within a short time," end of quote. But some doctors are skeptical, pointing to potential complications such as bleeding, stroke, or infection after surgery. Dr. Stanley Karoff, an emeritus professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania, said scientists still don't know the exact pathways or mechanisms in the brain that produce depression, which is why it's hard to pick a site to stimulate. It's also tough to select the right patients for DBS, he said, and approved successful treatments for depression are available. He said of the DBS for depression, quote, "I believe from a psychiatric point of view the science is not there," end of quote. Hollenbeck acknowledges DBS hasn't been a cure-all. She still takes medicines for depression and needs ongoing care. She recently visited Mayberg in her office and discussed recovery. The doctor told her, quote, "It's not about being happy all the time. It's about making progress," end of quote. That's what researchers are studying now, how to track progress. Recent research by Mayberg and others in the journal Nature showed it's possible to provide a readout of how someone is doing at any given time. Analyzing the brain activity of DBS patients, researchers found a unique pattern that reflects the recovery process. This gives them an objective way to observe how people get better and distinguish between impending depression and typical mood fluctuations. Scientists are confirming those findings using newer DBS devices in a group of patients that include Hollenbeck. She and other participants do their part largely at home. She gives researchers regular brain recordings by logging onto a tablet, putting a remote above the pacemaker-like device in her chest and sending the data. She answers questions that pop up about how she feels. Then she records a video that will be analyzed for things such as facial expression and speech. Occasionally, she goes to Mount Sinai's Q Lab, an immersive environment where scientists do quantitative research collecting all sorts of data, including how she moves in a virtual forest or makes circles in the air with her arms. Like many other patients, she moves her arms faster now that she's doing better. Data from recordings and visits are combined with other information, such as life events, to chart how she's doing. This helps guide doctors' decisions, such as whether to increase her dose of electricity, which they did once. On a recent morning, Hollenbeck moved her collar and brushed her hair aside to reveal scars on her chest and head from her DBS surgery. To her, they're signs of how far she's come. She makes her way around the city, taking walks in the park and going to libraries, which were a refuge in childhood. She no longer worries that normal life challenges will trigger a crushing depression. She said, quote, "The stress is pretty extreme at times, but I'm able to see and remember, even on a bodily level, that I'm going to be okay. If I hadn't had DBS, I'm pretty sure I would not be alive today." End of quote. That is great news, and I hope that they continue the work into DBS. And I really quickly want to mention, if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts or experiencing depression, there are resources. You are not alone. Call 988 or text 988, and they will help you. Right now, I want to get to our next story. This is from the Associated Press out of Flint, Michigan. This is dated February 20th. A Michigan man was charged Tuesday under the state's new law requiring safe storage of guns after his 2-year-old daughter shot herself in the head with his revolver the day after the law took effect. The 44-year-old Flint man became the first person to be charged with violating the law that took effect on February 13th. That is according to Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton. The girl is in critical condition in the hospital. At a news conference announcing charges against the man, Layton said that this law, quote, "went into effect 1 week ago today. This incident occurred the very next day," end of quote. The man faces charges including first-degree child abuse, a felony violation of Michigan's gun storage law, being a felon in possession of a firearm and ammunition, and lying to a police officer in a violent crime investigation. Flint police learned of the shooting after the man took the girl to a hospital. They found 2 guns in the bedroom of the man's home, the revolver and a semi-automatic pistol. Both were unsecured and loaded. Police said they found no gun locks or safes in the bedroom, which didn't matter anyway. He wasn't supposed to have them as a prior felon. So there you go. Speaking of guns, I want to real quickly hit this story. This is Nick Ingram and Marjorie A. Beck writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 20th out of Kansas City, Missouri. 2 men charged with murder in last week's shooting after the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade were strangers who pulled out guns and began firing within seconds of starting an argument. That's according to court documents released Tuesday. Missouri prosecutors said at a news conference that Lindell Mays of Raytown, Missouri, and Dominic Miller of Kansas City, Missouri, have been charged with second-degree murder and several weapons counts in the shooting that left 1 person dead and roughly 24 others injured. Both men were shot during the melee, according to probable cause affidavits. Both have been hospitalized since, according to Jackson County Prosecutor Gene Peters Baker. The argument began when 2 groups of people grew agitated over the belief that people in the other group were staring at them. That's dumb! We're shooting each other over absolutely asinine stuff. Unbelievable. Surveillance video shows Mays and someone with him aggressively approaching the other group. The video showed Mays was the first to begin shooting despite being surrounded by crowds of people, including children, according to one of the affidavits. According to the affidavit, Mays told detectives, quote, "he hesitated shooting because he knew there were kids there," end of quote. He told investigators he began firing after someone in the other group said, quote, "I'm going to get you," end of quote, which he took to mean they would try to kill him. He said he chose a random person from the other group to shoot at as that person was running away. Miller initially told investigators that he and his friends began running after hearing gunfire and that he was shot in the back. When investigators told Miller they had video of him chasing someone in May's group and shooting, Miller admitted to firing 4 or 5 shots. A bullet from Miller's gun killed disc jockey Lisa Lopez Galvan. She was in a nearby crowd of people watching the Chiefs rally. By the way, 2 of her kids were injured in that shooting as well. Authorities did not release ages for either man. Court records show Mays is in his early 20s. Miller is either 18 or 19. Like that's an excuse for anything. The woman who was killed was a mother of 2 and a host of a local radio program called Taste of Tejano. Since her death, Taylor Swift, the singer, has donated $100,000 to her GoFundMe page. So there you go. We're shooting each other over absolutely dumb things. The problem isn't the dumb things. The problem is the guns. We don't need the guns. The guns are the problem. I hate to be a record on repeat, skipping, but it's the truth. The guns are the problem. And a lack of empathy. I'll say that too. Lack of empathy. And I real quickly want to get to our last story here. This is Joy Capoletti writing for the Associated Press out of Lansing, Michigan. This is dated February 20th. Michigan Republicans' clash over leadership of their state party could mean dueling presidential nominating conventions, which will take place March 2nd, even though the National Republican Party has said members properly removed former chair Christina Caramo. Former Congressman Pete Hoekstra, the new Michigan GOP chair, is recognized by the Republican National Committee, announced Tuesday that the state Republican Party will hold a presidential nominating convention to allocate 39 of the state's 55 presidential delegates on March 2nd in Grand Rapids. But Caramo and her backers plan to hold a convention the same day in Detroit. Meanwhile, hearings regarding the dispute over Michigan's Republican chair position are scheduled for later this week, and a judge could resolve the situation before the convention events. Caramo was voted out as party chair by some members in the party during a January 6th meeting, but she has refused to accept the results, claiming the meeting was not official and had been illegally organized. The Republican National Committee recognized Hoekstra, who served as a U.S. representative from Michigan from 1993 until 2011, as the state party chair last week. Donald Trump had previously endorsed Hoekstra for the position. Michigan Republicans' process for allocating delegates already was complicated this year. Democrats who control the state legislature voted to move Michigan's primary to February 27th. The date change violated RNC rules, forcing Republicans to split the primary into 2 parts. The party will allocate 16 of the state's 55 delegates based on the results of the February 27th primary. Republican precinct delegates will allocate the remaining number at the March 2nd state convention. The matter of who's running the party could potentially be resolved in court before the March 2nd convention. A judge in Kent County on Tuesday allowed for a lawsuit seeking to oust Caramo from the chair post to move forward. Hearings on whether an injunction against Caramo should be issued are scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday, and we will keep you apprised of what happens in the Kent County courts regarding Caramo, Hoekstra, and the Republican Party. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.